It was a freezing winter morning in Detroit. Grace Stanfeel sat on the cold floor of an empty apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes and overdue bills scattered across the worn carpet. His hand shook as he held the last eviction notice. 38 years old, 2 young children, no job, no money, no hope. Outside, the snow fell silently, covering the deserted streets like a white blanket over a world that seemed to have forgotten her. She looked at the framed photo in the box next to it, her ex-husband, smiling, before everything fell apart. Before the lies, before the debts, before he walked away and left her alone with 2 children and a shattered dream. Grace closed her eyes and took a deep breath. At that moment, she could give up. She could call her mother, beg for help, accept the failure everyone expected of her, or she could do something no one thought she could do. She opened her eyes, and for the first time in months, Grace Stanfeel made a decision. She wouldn't give up, even if the whole world said she couldn't do it. Connection. Grace Stanfeel was not born to be a businesswoman. She was born into a simple family in a suburb of Cleveland, where dreams were luxuries few could afford. His father worked in an auto parts factory, leaving before dawn and returning with grease-stained hands and exhausted bodies. His mother cleaned the homes of wealthy families, kneeling on marble floors she would never have in her own home. And from an early age, Grace learned a cruel lesson. Women like her didn't build empires. They survived, silent, invisible, grateful for what little they had. At 18, she met Daniel. He was charming, ambitious, full of brilliant promises that seemed to brighten Grace's bleak future. He said he would start his own business, that he would change the world, that he would give her a different life. And Grace believed. They married young, had 2 children, Emma 7 and Luke 5, and for years she dedicated her life to building a home while Daniel pursued his tireless projects. But Daniel's promises never came to fruition. Businesses failed one after another. Debts grew like weeds, suffocating any chance of a fresh start. And when the weight of responsibility became too much for him to bear, Daniel did what many men do when the world falls apart. He just disappeared. One cold October morning, Grace woke to find a crumpled note on the kitchen table. "I can't do it anymore, sorry." Just that. No goodbye to the children, no explanation, no phone number, just silence and a mountain of bills she didn't know how to pay. In the months that followed, Grace tried everything. She looked for jobs in department stores, restaurants and offices. She filled out applications, waited for calls that never came, and smiled politely while managers looked at her blank resume with disinterest. Without a college degree and with 2 young children, doors closed before she even finished speaking. People looked at her with pity, or worse, with contempt disguised as concern. "You should have studied more," they said. "You shouldn't have gotten married so soon. You shouldn't have trusted him. You won't make it alone." Grace listened to everything in silence, with her head down, biting her lower lip to keep from screaming, while shame burned inside her like a live coal. She sold what she could. The television, the few remaining pieces of furniture, even the cheap jewelry Daniel had given her at their wedding. She asked her mother for help, who barely had enough for herself and still shared what little she had. She accepted donations from neighbors, swallowing her pride with each plate of food she put on her children's table. Emma and Luke were too young to fully understand what was happening, but Grace could see the silent questions in their eyes. Why don't we have more toys? Why is the fridge empty? Why did Daddy leave? And every night, when the children were finally crammed into the same bed because Grace had sold the other one, she would lock herself in the tiny bathroom, sit on the cold tile floor, and cry. She wept for the life she had lost, for the man who had abandoned her, for the overwhelming feeling that she was invisible, disposable, insignificant. I cried because I was tired, because I was scared, because I didn't know how much longer I could keep pretending everything would be okay. But deep down, somewhere deep and hidden inside her, There was something that refused to die. A spark, small, fragile, but stubborn. Grace has always had a talent. Since childhood, she loved sewing. She learned from her maternal grandmother, a strong woman who made clothes by hand to save money and who transformed discarded scraps into something beautiful, useful, and special. Grace would spend entire afternoons beside her, watching her deft fingers glide over the needle, creating perfect stitches, transforming fabric into art. But no one ever took it seriously. It was just a hobby, a girl's distraction, something that didn't pay the bills or build a future. Until that freezing winter morning in Detroit, when Grace looked at the bills piled high, at her children sleeping hungry, at the eviction notice taped to the door, and decided she had to try. She took out the old Singer sewing machine that had been sitting in the back of the closet, covered in dust and neglect, cleaned it carefully, and set to work. Grace couldn't afford new fabrics, so she used whatever she could find. Old clothes, curtains donated by neighbors, torn sheets, anything that could be transformed. And with those tired, trembling but determined hands, she began to create. The incident. Grace worked for 3 days without stopping. She sewed until her hands ached, until her eyes burned with fatigue, until the morning light streamed in through the foggy apartment window. Emma and Luke watched cartoons on the old tablet while she turned scraps into something that looked valuable. Bags, small, simple, but made with care, with soul, with each stitch carrying the weight of the desperate hope of a mother who had nothing left to lose. She made 5 bags that first week. Each was different. One had plaid fabric from an old shirt of Daniel's that she couldn't sell. Another was made from faded denim with lace trim left over from a curtain. The third had an outer pocket hand-sewn with red thread she found in the back of a drawer. They weren't perfect. The seams were uneven in places. The workmanship was amateurish. But there was something about them that Grace couldn't explain. There was life. There was history. There was the mark of someone refusing to disappear. Grace took photos with her old cell phone, the cracked camera slightly distorting the images. She posted them to a local online sales group with shaking hands, handmade bags, one of a kind, $20 each. She waited and waited. The hours passed slowly, each minute feeling like an eternity as Grace compulsively refreshed the page, checking to see if anyone had expressed interest. Nothing. The digital silence was deafening. Grace felt her chest tighten. Maybe no one wanted her scholarships. Maybe she wasn't good enough. Maybe everyone was right when they said she couldn't make it. But then, as the sun began to set on that cold December afternoon, a notification appeared on the screen. A woman named Rebecca had commented on the post. "These bags are beautiful. Do you make them to order?" Grace looked at the message with tears in her eyes. Her hands shook so much she almost dropped the phone. "Yes," she typed quickly. "Yes, I do. What type are you looking for?" The conversation flowed. Rebecca wanted 3 bags as Christmas gifts for her sisters. She wanted specific colors, different sizes, and personalized details. And I was willing to pay $60 for each one, $180. Grace couldn't hold back her tears. She covered her mouth with her hand to keep from sobbing loudly and waking the children. $180 wouldn't pay all the bills. It wouldn't solve all the problems, but it was more money than she'd seen in months. And more important than that, it was proof that she could do something, that her hands had value, that she had worth. Grace worked tirelessly on the 3 bags she ordered. Every stitch was precisely placed. Every detail was carefully thought out. She wanted those bags to be perfect, not just because she needed the money, but because she needed to prove to herself that she could do it. When he was finished, he photographed the pieces and sent them to Rebecca. The answer came within minutes. "Grace, these bags are amazing. You have a real talent. My sisters will love them." But it was the next message that changed everything. "Can I post pictures of the bags on my Instagram? I have a home decor store and I think my clients will love your work." Grace could barely breathe. Yes, she replied. Please. Rebecca had almost 20,000 followers. The next day, she posted photos of the bags with a heartwarming caption saying she had discovered an incredible artisan named Grace Stanfeel, a single mom from Detroit who made beautiful, one-of-a-kind pieces. And suddenly, Grace's phone started ringing. Messages, dozens of them, then hundreds. People wanted to buy. People wanted to order. People asked if she shipped to other states, if she made them in other colors, if she accepted custom orders. Grace froze, staring at her phone screen as if it were an alien object. That couldn't be real. But it was. Within a week, she had received over 100 orders. The small apartment that once seemed like a silent tomb was now filled with fabrics, threads, scissors, and patterns scattered everywhere. Grace barely slept. She would wake up at 4 in the morning, sew until the kids woke up, take Emma to school, rush back, sew while Luke watched cartoons, pick up Emma, make dinner as quickly as possible, put the kids to bed, and get back to her sewing machine. His back ached, his fingers bled from the needle sticks, his eyes burned with exhaustion, but Grace didn't stop. Because for the first time in her life she was building something that was hers, something no one could take away, something that proved everyone who doubted her wrong. And when Emma asked one night, in that sweet, curious child's voice, "Mommy, are you going to be rich?" Grace smiled. He really smiled for the first time in so long. "I don't know, my love," she replied, stroking her daughter's hair, "but I'll try." And whether she tried or not, Grace already knew one thing. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer disposable. She was Grace Stanfeel, and she was just getting started. The confrontations, the following months, were the most difficult of Grace's life. Not because there was a lack of work. On the contrary, there was too much work. Orders poured in non-stop. The Instagram account Rebecca had created for herself exploded with new followers every day. Women from all over the country wanted her bags, wanted to be part of the story of overcoming obstacles that was coming to life on social media. But Grace was alone in a tiny apartment with an old sewing machine that threatened to break at any moment. No money to hire help, no space to store materials, no time to breathe. She would wake up at 3 in the morning and sew until her hands shook with exhaustion. She would make breakfast for the children with red, puffy eyes. She would rush Emma to school, return to work, pick her up late in the afternoon, make dinner in a hurry, put the children to bed, and return to her sewing machine every day, without rest, without breaks. And even then, she couldn't keep up with demand. Messages piled up. Customers complained about the delay. Some cancelled their orders. Others left vitriolic comments on social media saying Grace was unprofessional, that she didn't know how to run a business, that she was too amateurish to succeed. Grace read those words late at night and felt her chest tighten. Maybe they were right. Maybe she really didn't know what she was doing. Maybe it would be better to give up before you fail completely. But every time that thought came, Grace looked at Emma and Luke sleeping, at the bills that were finally being paid, at the refrigerator that now had food in it, and she kept sewing. It was on a rainy afternoon in March that Grace received a call that would change everything. It was from a woman named Victoria Chen, who owned a luxury boutique in Manhattan. "Hi, Grace. I saw your work online and was impressed. I have a proposal for you." Grace gripped the phone tightly, her heart racing. Victoria wanted to sell Grace's handbags in her store, but there were conditions. She needed at least 50 pieces per month, of impeccable quality, professionally finished, and priced to allow a profit margin for the boutique, 50 scholarships per month. Grace could barely make 20 working day and night. "I don't know if I can," Grace admitted, her voice breaking. "It's just me. I don't have the equipment. I don't have any help." Victoria was silent for a moment. "Grace, you're talented. You have a story people want to support. But if you want to truly grow, you need to take the next step. You need to invest in your business. You need to believe you deserve to be great." Grace hung up the phone, her hands shaking. Invest? How? With what money? She had saved a little from the sales, but it was barely enough to pay the back rent and buy materials for the next orders. But that night, as she stared at the apartment's cracked ceiling, Grace made a terrifying decision. She would ask for a loan. She went to the bank the next morning. She sat down across from a grey-haired manager who looked at her with barely concealed skepticism. Grace explained her business. She showed photos of the bags, she showed messages from customers, she showed Victoria's proposal. The manager leafed through the papers with disinterest. "Miss Stanfeel, you have no credit history. You have no collateral. You have no partners. You're asking for $15,000 to sew handbags at home. That's not a solid business plan." Grace felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I know it seems risky," she said, her voice steady despite her inner tremor. "But I'm selling. People want my work. I just need a chance." The manager sighed. "I'm sorry, but I can't approve this loan." Grace walked away from the bench with tears in her eyes, feeling the crushing weight of rejection. Everyone was right. She couldn't do it, but when he got home, there was a message from Rebecca on his phone. "Grace, you need to see this." It was a link to an article from the Detroit Free Press. The headline read, "Detroit single mom turns desperation into thriving business sewing handmade bags." The article told her story. It talked about Daniel's abandonment, about the hardships, about how she had started from scratch and was building something special, and at the end there was a line that made Grace cry. Grace Stanfeel is proof that a woman's strength can move mountains when the world tells her she can't even take a step. Within 48 hours, the article went viral. Thousands of people shared it, commented on it, offered support. And then, something unexpected happened. An investor named Helen Brooks got in touch. Helen was a retired businesswoman who had built her own clothing company decades ago. She read Grace's story and saw something familiar. "Grace, I want to help you. I'll invest $20,000 in your business. In return, I just want you to promise one thing: never give up, never let anyone tell you you can't." Grace couldn't speak. She just cried. He cried with gratitude, with relief, with fear, with hope. With Helen's investment, Grace rented a small studio in downtown Detroit. She purchased 3 industrial sewing machines and hired 2 seamstresses to help her. And for the first time, she began to breathe. The business grew quickly. Grace's handbags began appearing in boutiques in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Fashion magazines wrote about her. Digital influencers wore her pieces. Minor celebrities posted photos wearing her creations. Grace Stanfeel, the woman no one believed in, was building an empire. But success brought new challenges, and the biggest of them was about to appear at the door of his studio. It was Daniel, the man who had abandoned her, the man who had left her and the children with nothing, and he wanted to talk. It remains. Grace was checking the week's orders when she heard the studio doorbell ring. It was mid-afternoon on an ordinary Tuesday. The seamstresses were intently working at their machines. The rhythmic sound of needles piercing fabric filled the space with a mechanical, comforting music. She walked to the door without much thought, and when it opened, the world stopped. Daniel. He was standing there, his hands in the pockets of his grey coat, his hair shorter than she remembered, a few new wrinkles around his eyes. He looked older, more tired, more human than the monster she had constructed in her memory. Grace felt her stomach churn. "Hi, Grace," he said, his voice low, almost embarrassed. She didn't answer. She couldn't find words that made sense. Can I come in? Just a few minutes, please." Grace considered slamming the door in his face. She considered screaming. She thought of everything she'd rehearsed in her head over the past 2 years, all the things she would say if he ever came back. But instead, she just stepped aside and let him in. They sat at a small table in the corner of the studio, away from the seamstresses who pretended not to be paying attention. Daniel looked around, observing the machines, the fabrics, the finished bags waiting to be packed. "You did all this," he said. And it wasn't a question, it was a statement filled with something Grace couldn't quite identify. Admiration, regret, envy. "Why are you here, Daniel?" Grace asked, arms crossed, her voice steady despite the chaos she felt inside. He sighed deeply, running his hands over his face. "I saw the article. I saw the photos on social media. I saw that you did it." Grace said nothing, she just waited. "I messed up, Grace. I know it. I'm a coward. I left you. I left the kids. I ran away because I couldn't handle the pressure, the failure, the feeling that I wasn't man enough to take care of the family." His voice broke. "I drank a lot. I lost jobs. I stayed at a friend's house for months until he kicked me out. I slept in my car. I thought about bad things, Grace. Things that scared me." Grace felt her chest tighten, but not out of pity, out of anger. "And you think I didn't think so too," Grace said, her voice trembling. "You think I had it easy. You left me alone with 2 children, no money, no food, no hope. I had to beg for help. I had to accept donations from strangers. I had to look my children in the eye and lie that everything was fine." Daniel lowered his head. I know, Grace, and I have no excuse. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and that I'm trying to get better. I'm working. I'm in therapy. I'm trying to be a better person." Grace took a deep breath, trying to control the emotions that threatened to overflow. "Why are you really here, Daniel?" He hesitated. "I wanted to see the children." Grace felt her blood run cold. "See the kids? You abandoned them. You left them crying, asking for you every night. Emma had nightmares for months. Luke stopped talking for weeks. And now you want to show up out of nowhere and be their father again?" Daniel raised his hands in a defensive gesture. "I'm not asking to come back, Grace. I know I don't deserve this. I just want them to know that I'm sorry, that I haven't stopped thinking about them, that you what?" Grace interrupted, her voice rising. "That you love them?" "Love doesn't abandon, Daniel. Love doesn't disappear when things get tough. Love stays. Love fights. And you didn't do any of those things." The seamstresses stopped working. The silence in the studio was deafening. Daniel had tears in his eyes. "I know I wasn't a good father. I know I wasn't a good husband. But I'm trying, Grace. I'm really trying to be better." Grace closed her eyes, feeling the weight of everything she had carried alone for so long. Part of her wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that people could change, that forgiveness was possible, that families could be mended like the fabric she sewed every day. But another part, the wounded part, the part that had survived abandonment, the part that had learned to be strong when the world told her she was weak, that part knew the truth. Some things, when they break, cannot be fixed. "I need to think," Grace said finally. "I need to talk to Emma and Luke. I need to know what they want, because this isn't about me or you, Daniel. It's about them." Daniel nodded, wiping his eyes. "Thank you, Grace. Thank you for listening." He got up and walked to the door, but before he left, he turned around one last time. "You're amazing, you know? You always have been. I was just too stupid to realize it." And then he left. Grace stood there, alone in the middle of the studio, as the seamstresses slowly returned to their work. She looked at the stacked bags, the sewing machines, the space she had built with her own hands. All of it was hers. She had achieved it without Daniel. She had survived without him. She had thrived without him. And now he was back, wanting to be part of a story he didn't help write. Grace didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should let Daniel see the children. I didn't know if I should forgive him. I didn't know if I was being strong or just cruel, but she knew one thing. She didn't need him anymore, and maybe, just maybe, that was the most important answer of all. The meeting. Grace couldn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling of the room that was now hers alone, in a better apartment, in a safer neighborhood, all earned through her own hard work. Daniel's words echoed in his mind. I wanted to see the children, as if it were that simple, as if 2 years of neglect could be erased with an apology and a few tears. Grace thought of Emma, who was now 9, and had learned not to ask about her father anymore. She thought of Luke, who was 7, and barely remembered what Daniel's voice sounded like. They had moved on, they had adapted. They had learned that family wasn't just blood. It was presence, it was care, it was showing up every day, even when things were tough. But Grace also knew that, deep down, the children still carried the wound of abandonment. Emma drew complete families at school, and always left the father's space blank. Luke asked his friends what his parents were like, with the painful curiosity of someone trying to fill a void he couldn't name. The next morning, Grace did what she always did when she needed advice. He called Helen. Helen Brooks wasn't just her investor. She had become a mentor, a friend, a mother figure Grace had never fully experienced. They met for coffee at a small bakery near the studio. Grace told her everything, about Daniel, about the proposal, about the confusion she felt. Helen listened in silence, slowly stirring the sugar into her coffee, her eyes attentive and kind. "What do you want to do, Grace?" she asked when Grace finished. "I don't know," Grace admitted. "Part of me wants to protect Emma and Luke from further disappointment, but another part feels selfish for making this decision alone. What if they grow up hating me for not letting them know their father?" Helen smiled sadly. "Grace, you've carried the weight of the world on your shoulders for long enough. You don't have to carry this one too." She held Grace's hand across the table. "Let your children decide. Talk to them. Honestly, with love, and whatever their choice, support it, because you're strong enough to do it." Grace felt her eyes well up. "What if he lets them down again? Then you'll be there to take care of them, just like you always have been." That night, Grace sat with Emma and Luke in the living room. They were eating popcorn, watching an animated movie, when Grace turned down the volume on the television. "Kids, I need to talk to you about something important." Emma looked at her curiously. Luke licked the salt from his fingers and listened. "Your daddy, he's back." The silence was immediate. Emma paled. Luke frowned in confusion. "He wants to see you," Grace continued, her voice soft. "But I'm not going to force you to do anything. I want you to decide. If you want to meet him, I'll take you. If you don't, that's okay too." Emma was the first to speak. "Why did he leave, Mom?" Grace took a deep breath. "Because he was scared. Because he didn't know how to deal with his problems. Because he made a huge mistake. And why does he want to go back now?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "Because he says he's sorry. And because he says he wants to try to be a better father." Luke looked at his sister, then at his mother. "Is he leaving again?" Grace felt her heart break. "I don't know, my love. I can't promise I won't." Emma wiped away the tears that were beginning to fall. "I want to see him," she said softly, "just once. Just to know if he really misses us." Luke nodded. "Me too." Grace hugged them both tightly, trying to hide her own tears. "So let's see him. Together." The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday in a public park near the city centre. Grace arrived with the children holding her hands, the 3 of them walking slowly across the damp lawn. Daniel was already there, sitting on a bench, visibly nervous. When he saw Emma and Luke, he stood up, his eyes filling with tears. "Hi," he said, his voice breaking. The children stood still, not knowing what to do. Grace crouched down beside them. "You can go. It's okay." Emma made the first move. Then Luke. Daniel knelt on the floor to be at their level. "You've grown so much," he said, smiling through his tears. "Emma, you're so tall. And Luke, Look at that hair. Luke touched his own hair shyly. Emma looked at her father with critical, assessing eyes. You left us, she said bluntly. Daniel nodded. I left. And it was the worst thing I ever did in my life. Why? Because I was scared. Scared of not being good enough. Scared of disappointing you. And I ended up doing just that. He wiped his eyes. But I thought about you every day, Emma. And I really, really want the chance to be the father you deserve. Emma was silent for a moment. Then try it, she said. Daniel blinked in surprise. Prove you won't leave again, not with words, with actions. He looked at his daughter, this little girl who had become so strong, so wise beyond her years, and nodded slowly. I'll prove it. I promise. Grace watched everything from afar, her heart heavy. She didn't know if Daniel would keep his promise. She didn't know if he had truly changed. But for the first time, she realized something important. It was no longer her responsibility to fix Daniel. It was no longer her responsibility to protect everyone from all pain. She had done her part. She had been strong. She had built an empire when everyone said she couldn't. And now she could let other people make their own choices, including Emma and Luke, including Daniel. Grace took a deep breath and felt something strange. Lightness. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying the world alone. And that, somehow, felt like the greatest triumph of all. Transformation. 6 months later, Grace's life had changed in ways she never imagined possible. The small studio in downtown Detroit had transformed into something much larger. With growing sales and increasing demand, Grace had to move to a renovated industrial warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Now, she had 15 employees, women like her, single mothers, women who had been abandoned, women who needed a second chance and found in Grace not just an employer, but an ally. Grace Stanfeel's bags were no longer just products. They were symbols, symbols of resistance, of new beginnings, of women who refused to accept the fate the world had chosen for them. Each piece came with a small, hand-sewn label that read, "Made with strength, made with hope, made by women who didn't give up." And the customers loved it. The bags appeared in fashion magazines. Celebrities wore them at events. Bloggers posted videos showcasing their collections. And with each new sale, Grace reinvested part of the profits into training programs for vulnerable women. She created free sewing workshops for single mothers. She offered scholarships to young people who wanted to learn the craft. She opened her studio doors to women who needed a safe place to work and rebuild their lives. Grace Stanfeel had built more than one empire. She had built a community, a chosen family of women who supported each other, who strengthened each other, who proved every day that none of them were alone. On a sunny September afternoon, Grace was in the warehouse office when she received a call. It was from a television production company in New York. "Hi, Grace. My name is Amanda Rivera. I work for a talk show, and we'd love to tell your story nationally. Would you be interested in participating?" Grace held the phone in disbelief. "A national television program?" "That's right. We want to show you how you transformed your life and are helping other women do the same. You're an inspiration, Grace." Grace accepted. 2 weeks later, she was sitting in a brightly lit Manhattan studio, wearing one of her own bags, in front of cameras and a live audience. The presenter, a charismatic woman named Jennifer Cole, smiled warmly. "Grace Stanfeel, welcome. Your story is extraordinary. You went from being a penniless single mother to owning a thriving business employing dozens of women. What was that journey like?" Grace took a deep breath. "It was the hardest journey of my life," it began. "I lost everything. I lost my marriage, my home, my dignity. People looked at me with pity, others judged me, many said I couldn't do it." She paused, her eyes shining. "But I learned something important. When you're at rock bottom, you have two choices, give up or dig your way out, and I chose to dig." The audience applauded. Jennifer leaned forward. "And what would you say to other women who are going through what you went through, who feel invisible, disposable, and hopeless?" Grace looked directly into the camera, as if speaking to every woman who needed to hear those words. "I'd say you're not invisible. You're not disposable. You don't need anyone's approval to be valuable. Your hands have power. Your voice has power. And even when the whole world tells you can't, you can prove them wrong. Not because you want revenge, but because you deserve a life that's yours. A life you've built. A life you're proud of." The audience rose to their feet, applauding. Many women were crying. Grace cried too. After the recording, while Grace was waiting for the car that would take her to the airport, her cell phone rang. It was Emma. "Mom, we saw it. Everyone at school saw it. You were amazing." Grace smiled, her heart warm. "Thank you, my love. Are you okay? How was your day with Dad?" Over the past few months, Daniel had kept his promise. He showed up every weekend to pick up Emma and Luke. He took them to the park, to the movies, to pizza. It wasn't perfect. There was still tension. There were still wounds that took time to heal. But he was present, and that was more than Grace had expected. "It was cool," Emma said. "He took us bowling, and he asked about you. He said he's proud." Grace felt something strange in her chest. It wasn't love. It wasn't complete forgiveness, but it was something close to peace. "I'm glad, dear. See you at home tomorrow." When she hung up, Grace looked out the studio window at New York City lit by the sunset. She thought of Grace from 2 years ago, that woman sitting on the cold floor of an empty apartment, holding an eviction notice, without hope, without a future. And he thought of Grace now, businesswoman, mentor, inspiration. They were not the same person, and yet they were. Because the strength Grace had now had always been there, just hidden, just waiting for the right moment to emerge. Grace Stanfeel had not become strong. She always was. She just had to believe it. That night, on her way back to Detroit, Grace stopped by the warehouse before heading home. The lights were off. The machines were silent. But the space still vibrated with the energy of all the women who worked there, who dreamed there, who rebuilt their lives there. Grace walked slowly between the tables, touching the fabrics, the threads, the finished bags waiting to be shipped. Each stitch represented a choice, each seam an act of resistance, each bag a story of new beginnings. And all of that, absolutely all of it, had started with a single decision, the decision not to give up. Grace locked the shed and went home, where Emma and Luke were waiting for her with tight hugs and stories about their day. She prepared dinner. She heard about school, about friends, about the children's dreams, and when she finally put them both to sleep, Grace stood in the bedroom doorway, watching them breathe softly. They were safe, fed, loved, and she had done it. Alone first, then with help, but always with the strength that no one but herself could give. Grace closed the door slowly and went to her room. He sat on the bed and picked up the old notebook where he had started writing his first sketches of bags years ago. On the first page, in the shaky handwriting of someone in despair, she had written, "Please let this work." Grace turned to a blank page and wrote something new. It worked. And that was just the beginning. She closed the notebook, turned off the light, and slept. For the first time in years, without fear of tomorrow, because tomorrow she knew would be hers, just like today, just like yesterday that she had transformed into something beautiful. Grace Stanfeel had built an empire, and no one, absolutely no one, could take that away from her. 5 years later, Grace was at the grand opening of her first brick-and-mortar store in Chicago. The space was spacious and elegant, with white walls and light wood shelves where her bags were displayed like works of art. But what caught the most attention was the back wall. In it, photographs of women, dozens of them, hundreds, all who had attended Grace's workshops, all who had learned to sew, to become entrepreneurs, to rebuild their lives, each photo with a sentence underneath. They said I couldn't do it, but I did. Grace watched people come into the store, touching the bags, reading the stories, crying with emotion. Emma, now 14, was at his side. "Mom, you changed so many people's lives." Grace smiled, hugging her daughter. "No, my love. I just showed them what they were already capable of. The strength was always in them, just as it was always in me." She looked at the crowded store, at the smiling women, at the empire she had built stitch by stitch. And then Grace understood the most important truth of all. Success was not in the money, in the stores, in the bags sold. Success was in never giving up on herself. Because in the end, Grace Stanfeel's greatest victory wasn't proving others wrong. She went to prove to herself that she was always strong enough. And that strength, that unstoppable, unshakable, eternal strength, no one could ever take away, because she didn't come from outside. She was always inside, waiting to be discovered.